How did your dad lose his custody rights? My dad's first holiday with full custody almost became my last. I was reaching for the mashed potatoes when the pain hit, like someone was twisting a knife in my lower right side. Dad, I whispered, gripping the table. My stomach really hurts. Not now, Mason, he said, not even looking at me. We're about to do the family toast. This was our first Thanksgiving at Grandma Fiona's house in 3 years. The first one since Dad won partial custody. The first one without Mom. I want to make a toast, Grandma Fiona began, raising her wine glass, to having our family back together, away from certain negative influences. Everyone knew she meant Mom. The pain was getting worse. I pressed my hand against my side and felt heat radiating through my shirt. Dad, I tried again. I think something's wrong. Mason's trying to ruin dinner, my cousin Sinan announced. Just like last time. Last time, when I was 8 and threw up at Easter because Mom had just told me about the divorce. They still hadn't forgiven me for making a scene. I'm not trying to. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I doubled over. Oh, here we go, Aunt Linda sighed. Fiona, didn't I tell you? The mother probably coached him to do this. My mom's not even here, I protested, then immediately regretted raising my voice as another stab of pain shot through me. Watch your tone, Dad warned. Your mother's not here because she lost that privilege, and you're not going to manipulate your way out of family time. I stood up, planning to go to the bathroom, but the room tilted. I grabbed the chair to steady myself. Sit down. Grandma Fiona's voice was ice. We do not leave the table during the family toast. It's disrespectful. I think I'm going to throw up. Of course you are. Uncle Robert laughed. Just like your mother. Always so dramatic. Always the victim. My 10-year-old sister Alice looked at me with worried eyes from across the table. She'd been silent since we arrived, intimidated by Dad's family. Please, I whispered. I need to lie down. You need to show respect, Dad said firmly. This is the first holiday we've had without your mother's interference. You're not ruining it. The pain was spreading now, like fire across my abdomen. I could feel sweat dripping down my back. Maybe he really is sick, my cousin Bethany said quietly. Don't you start, her mother snapped. He's fine. Just wants attention because Mommy's not here to baby him. I tried to sit back down, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The chair scraped loudly against the floor as I missed it and stumbled. Mason James! Dad stood up. That's enough. Dad, please. Tears were streaming down my face now. It hurts so bad. You know what hurts? Grandma Fiona stood too. Having to watch my son deal with your behavior. Having to see what that woman turned you into. Alice suddenly pushed back her chair. He's not faking, she screamed. Look at him. He's white. Alice, sit down, Dad ordered. No! She was sobbing now. Mom said if we ever needed help to call 911. She said you wouldn't listen. She said, your mother said a lot of things, Aunt Linda interrupted. Most of them lies. The room started spinning. I dropped to my knees, clutching my side. It felt like my insides were on fire. He's being ridiculous, Uncle Robert said. In my day, kids didn't pull these stunts. It's not a stunt. Alice was hysterical. Please, someone help him. I'm calling his mother, Aunt Linda announced. Through my tears, I saw Alice crawling under the table toward the kitchen. Smart girl. There was a landline in there. Where do you think you're going? Grandma Fiona grabbed Alice's ankle. Let go of her. I tried to yell, but it came out as a whisper. That's when I threw up. All over Grandma Fiona's Persian rug. My rug! She shrieked. Do you see? Do you see what these children are? Just like their mother, someone muttered. The pain was unbearable now. I curled into a ball on the floor, shaking. Get up, Dad said coldly. You're embarrassing me. I can't. Everything was going dark around the edges. Alice bit Grandma Fiona's hand and ran for the kitchen. That wild animal bit me. Someone stop her, Dad shouted. But Alice was already dialing. I could hear her screaming our address into the phone. Hang up that phone, Dad roared. No, Alice sobbed. You're letting him die, just like Mom said you would. What did that woman tell you? Grandma Fiona demanded. But that's when I started convulsing. Real, violent shaking that I couldn't control. Oh my gosh, someone whispered. He's having a seizure. That's not fake, Bethany said, her voice shaking. Finally, I heard Dad's voice crack. Call 911. Now. The last thing I remember was Alice's small hand in mine and her whispering, I'm sorry, Mason. I'm so sorry. Mom said to be brave. She said she loves us. Then everything went black. I woke up after emergency surgery. My appendix had burst. The doctor said if we'd waited another hour, I might not have made it. The infection had already started spreading. Dad couldn't look at me. He just kept saying, I didn't know, over and over. But Alice knew. Mom knew. And we were going to destroy him. The machines next to my bed kept beeping while I watched Dad pace back and forth by the window. His shoes squeaked on the floor with each turn. He kept saying the same 3 words over and over, real quiet, like he was praying. Alice's hand was warm and small in mine, and she leaned close to whisper that she'd called Mom from the nurse's station. Her breath smelled like the peppermint candy the nurse gave her. Dad's face looked gray under the hospital lights, and his shirt had blood on it from where I'd grabbed him. The fourth in my arm pulled when I tried to sit up more, sending a sharp sting through my wrist. Alice helped me adjust the pillow behind my back, her movements careful like she was afraid I might break. The door opened, and a woman in blue scrubs walked in carrying a clipboard. She looked at Dad first, then at me, then started explaining what happened inside my body. My appendix had burst open, and poison was spreading through my belly when they cut me open. She pointed to spots on my stomach where they'd had to clean out the infection. If we'd waited one more hour, she said, looking straight at Dad, I probably would have died. Dad's knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the windowsill to stay standing. Alice squeezed my hand harder, and I could feel her shaking. The surgeon kept talking about antibiotics and recovery time, while Dad just stared at the floor. She wrote notes on her clipboard and said she'd already told the emergency room staff about the delay in treatment. Dad's head snapped up at that, but he didn't say anything. The surgeon left, and we sat there in silence, except for the beeping machines. Around midnight, I heard running footsteps in the hallway, and then Mom burst through the door. She looked wild, her hair messy, and her coat half off her shoulders. Dad immediately backed toward the door, but Mom didn't even glance at him. She grabbed me and Alice both, pulling us against her chest so tight I could barely breathe. Her tears dropped onto my hospital gown, and she kept kissing the top of my head. Alice started sobbing into Mom's shoulder, and I felt my own tears coming again. Mom held us for what felt like forever, rocking us slightly like when we were little. Dad slipped out into the hallway without saying anything. The next morning, a woman with gray hair and a badge knocked on the door. She introduced herself as Donna Waite from Child Protective Services and said the hospital had called them. Mom sat up straighter in the chair she'd slept in all night. Donna explained that the emergency room staff documented that several adults stopped me from getting help for a dangerous medical problem. She had a folder with papers and started asking Mom questions about custody arrangements. Dad and Grandma showed up while Donna was still there, and Grandma immediately started talking loud and fast. She told Donna that Mom must have told me to fake being sick to ruin their family dinner. Dad nodded along, adding that I'd always been dramatic, and Mom encouraged it. Donna looked at them both, then opened her folder and pulled out some papers. She showed them the medical report that said my appendix had burst, and I almost died from infection. Grandma's mouth kept moving, but no sound came out. Donna said she'd already read all the medical records and understood exactly how serious this was. She turned to me and asked if I felt okay to talk about what happened. My head felt fuzzy from the pain medicine they kept giving me through the IV. I looked at Alice, and she nodded at me, so I nodded at Donna. Mom said she'd take Alice to get some breakfast from the cafeteria to give us privacy. Grandma tried to say she should stay, but Donna said family interviews were private. Once everyone left, Donna pulled her chair close to my bed and told me to take my time. I started from when the pain first hit during dinner and told her everything. How I begged Dad to help me, and he said I was ruining dinner. How Aunt called me dramatic, and Uncle laughed at me. How they wouldn't let me leave the table or go to the bathroom. I told her about throwing up on the rug and Dad telling me I was embarrassing him. Then I explained how Grandma grabbed Alice's ankle to stop her from calling for help. Donna wrote everything down in a notebook, sometimes asking me to repeat things to make sure she got it right. She asked how long I was asking for help before someone finally called 911. I tried to remember, but everything got blurry toward the end. She said that was okay, and that she was proud of me for being so brave. When we finished, she called Alice back in for her turn. Alice pulled out her phone and showed Donna the call history with the exact time she dialed 911. She explained how she crawled under the table and Grandma tried to stop her. The timing here feels really strange. Mason's appendix just happens to burst during the one holiday where Dad has custody. I'm curious what made Alice so prepared with that 911 plan, like Mom coached her for exactly this kind of emergency, but somehow knew Dad wouldn't listen to medical issues specifically. Alice's voice got louder when she told about biting Grandma's hand to get free. She said Grandma called her a wild animal, and Dad yelled at her to hang up the phone. Donna took pictures of the call log with her own phone. She asked Alice if anyone helped her, and Alice said no, everyone just watched or tried to stop her. 2 days later, the doctor said I could go home soon, but there was a big fight about where home was. Dad said his custody agreement meant I had to go with him, but Mom said no way. Donna came back and explained there was something called a temporary safety plan. She said Alice and I would stay with Mom until a judge could have a hearing about what happened. Dad's face turned red, and he started yelling about his rights as a father. He said Mom was turning us against him, and this was all her plan. Donna stayed calm and said the safety plan was already approved based on the medical evidence. Dad slammed his hand on the wall and demanded to take us home right then. He stepped toward my bed, and Mom moved between us. A security guard showed up because the nurses had called when they heard yelling. Dad pointed at Mom and said she was kidnapping his kids. The guard looked at Donna, who showed him some papers and explained the situation. Dad kept getting louder, saying we belonged with him, and Mom had no right to keep us. The guard told Dad he needed to calm down or leave the hospital. Dad said he wasn't going anywhere without his children. The guard called for backup on his radio, and another guard arrived. They wrote down everything Dad was saying and doing in their report. Donna told me later that all of this was documented as evidence. Dad finally left when the guards said they'd call the police if he didn't. I watched him storm down the hallway, still yelling about his rights and how Mom would pay for this. The next few days in the hospital were the worst, not just because of the pain, but because I couldn't even stand up without help. The nurse had to hold my arm just to get me to the bathroom, and even that short walk left me shaking and sweating. My stomach muscles were basically useless from the surgery, and every time I tried to sit up on my own, it felt like someone was ripping me open again. Alice stayed with me every single day, curled up in the visitor's chair doing her homework on Mom's laptop. Mom had already set up virtual school for her because Alice refused to leave the hospital, too scared something would happen to me if she wasn't there. The physical therapist came twice a day to help me practice walking down the hallway, and I hated how weak I was, barely making it 20 feet before needing to sit down. Mom spent most of her time on the phone in the hallway, and I could hear her talking to someone named Cecilia Becker, who she said was the best custody lawyer in the state. They talked about emergency hearings and medical evidence and something called an ex parte order. When Mom came back in the room, she explained that Cecilia was already filing paperwork to change the custody arrangement based on what happened at Thanksgiving. The hospital discharged me after a week, and Mom drove us straight to her apartment, this tiny 2-bedroom place that was nothing like Dad's big house, but felt safer than anywhere I'd been in months. She'd already set up the living room for my recovery, with a special wedge pillow on the couch, and all my medications lined up on the coffee table with a schedule she'd typed out. Alice and I had to share the smaller bedroom, but she didn't complain, just helped Mom move her stuffed animals to make room for my things. I started writing everything down in a notebook Mom bought me, every detail I could remember from Thanksgiving, and all the other times Dad ignored when we were sick or hurt. Like when I had bad stomach pain 3 months ago, and he said I was being dramatic and didn't need urgent care. Or when Alice cut her hand on broken glass and he just put a Band-Aid on it instead of getting stitches. Writing it all down made it real in a way that helped me believe someone would actually listen this time. Alice's teacher called to check on her, and Mom set up a meeting with the school counselor, someone named Sophie Soto, to make sure Alice was handling everything okay. During their video call, I could hear Alice telling Sophie about how scared she was that night and how she thought I was going to die. Sophie said Alice was very brave and that she'd help her work through what happened. About 2 weeks after we got to Mom's apartment, we got a letter saying the court had appointed something called a guardian ad litem, a man named Hector Reynolds, who was supposed to represent what was best for Alice and me. Dad's family immediately started texting Mom saying Hector was probably biased against them and that this whole thing was a setup. Mom just saved all the texts and forwarded them to Cecilia. Alice was going through her old phone one day when she found a bunch of texts from Dad talking bad about Mom, saying she was crazy and telling us not to believe anything she said. She took screenshots of everything, especially the ones where he called Mom names and tried to make us think she didn't love us. She asked if we should show them to Hector when we met him, and I said, definitely yes. My first meeting with Hector was 3 weeks after the surgery, and I was still moving pretty slow. He came to Mom's apartment and sat across from me in the living room, this older guy with gray hair who spoke really soft and calm. He asked me to tell him exactly what happened that night, and I had to lift my shirt to show him the surgical scar that went across my whole lower stomach. I walked him through every minute I could remember, from when the pain started to when I passed out on Grandma's floor. He wrote everything down in a yellow legal pad and never interrupted me once. When I finished, he said what happened to me was completely inexcusable, and no child should ever have to beg for medical help. Alice met with him next, and she brought her phone to show the exact time she called 911, which was 7:43 p.m. according to the call log. She showed him all the screenshots of Dad's texts and explained how Grandma grabbed her ankle and called her a wild animal. Hector told her she was incredibly brave and that her quick thinking saved my life, which made her cry, but in a good way. That same week, my phone started blowing up with messages from a group chat someone in Dad's family had created. They were calling us liars and saying Mom had brainwashed us into making up stories. Aunt Linda wrote that we were ungrateful brats who didn't appreciate everything Dad did for us. Uncle Robert said kids today have no respect and that we needed discipline, not coddling. But then Bethany, my cousin who had said I looked really sick at dinner, sent me screenshots of the adult family group chat where they were planning what to tell people and trying to get their stories straight about what happened that night. Sophie met with Alice at the school the next day, and they worked out this whole safety plan where only Mom or people Mom approved could pick Alice up from the school. The office staff got a copy, and Sophie explained to them about the custody situation and how Grandma might try something. Alice came home that afternoon looking more relaxed than she had in weeks, because she knew Grandma couldn't just show up and take her away. 3 days later, we had to go to our first supervised visitation with Dad at this gray building downtown that looked like every government office ever built. The supervisor was this older woman who sat in the corner with a clipboard while Dad tried to act normal with us in this weird playroom that had toys for little kids, even though Alice was 10 and I was 14. Dad kept bringing up Mom every 5 minutes, asking if she told us what to say to the social worker, if she coached us about Thanksgiving, if she was filling our heads with lies about him. The supervisor would clear her throat whenever he got too pushy, But then she got a phone call and stepped out into the hallway for what she said would be just a minute. The second she left, Dad leaned forward and grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough that I couldn't pull away. "Your mother put you up to this whole thing, didn't she?" I pulled my phone out with my free hand and hit record without him noticing, keeping it low on my lap. "She's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to turn you against me." I kept my face blank, while he went on about how Mom was manipulative and how she'd poisoned us against his family and how we were destroying everything he'd worked for. The supervisor came back after about 3 minutes, and Dad immediately let go of my wrist and went back to talking about school and normal stuff. Alice had gone to the bathroom during all this, but when we were leaving, she grabbed my arm and whispered that she'd heard Grandma's voice in the lobby. She'd been standing right outside the bathroom door talking to Dad before we arrived, telling him exactly what to say to make Mom look bad in the supervisor's report. Alice had stood on the toilet seat to hear better through the door vent and memorized the exact words, which were something like, "Tell them their mother is unstable and has a history of making false accusations, and make sure you mention she's behind on her bills and can't provide properly." We told Mom about it when she picked us up, and she immediately called Cecilia, who said to write it all down with the exact time and date. 2 weeks later, I had my follow-up appointment with the surgeon who'd saved my life. She examined my scar, which was healing, but still looked pretty rough. This red line across my whole lower stomach that pulled when I moved too fast. She asked me to describe again what happened that night and how long I'd been in pain before getting help. Then she sat at her computer for like 20 minutes, typing up this detailed letter about how serious my condition was, using all these medical terms I didn't understand. Mason's recovery journal reads like evidence gathering 101. Smart kid knows documentation beats denial every time, especially when Dad's family texts provide their own proof against themselves, but basically saying the delay in treatment nearly killed me, and that peritonitis had already set in when I arrived. She printed out 3 copies, one for me, one for my medical records, and one she said she'd send directly to the court if needed. Mom's attorney Cecilia called that afternoon saying the surgeon's letter was exactly the kind of medical evidence they needed to show the severity of what happened. The next morning, Donna showed up at Mom's apartment for a home inspection. Mom had been cleaning for 2 days straight, even though the place was already pretty clean, making sure everything was perfect. Donna walked through each room with a checklist, taking pictures of Alice's homework station that Mom had set up in the corner of the living room with all her school supplies organized in little bins. She photographed the medication schedule Mom had posted on the fridge, showing exactly when I needed to take my antibiotics and pain meds with check marks for each dose. She looked in the kitchen cabinets, which were full of food, checked that we each had our own bed with clean sheets, made sure the bathroom had all our toiletries and first aid supplies. She spent extra time in our room where Mom had put up some of our artwork and photos, making it feel like home even though we'd only been there a few weeks. Donna wrote notes about everything being stable and appropriate, and said she was impressed with how organized Mom was, despite the sudden transition. That same night, my phone buzzed with a long text from Aunt Linda. She wrote this whole thing about how sorry she was that things got out of hand at Thanksgiving, but that I needed to think about what I was doing to the family. She said Dad was devastated, and that Grandma was having chest pains from the stress, and that we were tearing everyone apart with our accusations. She ended it by saying family was supposed to stick together, and that I should convince Alice to stop this nonsense before it went too far. I screenshotted the whole thing and forwarded it to Hector without writing back, because Cecilia had told us not to respond to any messages from Dad's family. 3 days later, Mom got a call from Alice's school saying Grandma had shown up trying to pick Alice up. The office staff followed the safety plan exactly, telling Grandma that she wasn't on the approved list and couldn't take Alice anywhere. Grandma started yelling about her rights as a grandmother and how she had emergency custody papers, which was a total lie. The principal called the police, while the secretary kept Grandma busy with paperwork she didn't actually need to fill out. When the officers arrived, Grandma tried to tell them the school was kidnapping her granddaughter, but they'd already talked to the principal who showed them the safety plan and custody documents. The police made Grandma leave and wrote up a report about the attempted violation of the custody agreement, which the school immediately sent to Sophie, Donna, and Mom's attorney. About a week later, Mom took us grocery shopping and I was pushing the cart past the deli section when I smelled gravy heating up. My whole body just froze, and suddenly, I was back on Grandma's floor, curled up in pain, while everyone stood around calling me dramatic. My chest got tight, and I couldn't breathe right. My hands started shaking, and I felt like I was going to pass out. Mom saw what was happening, and immediately abandoned the cart, getting me outside to the parking lot where she sat me down on a bench and helped me breathe slowly, counting with me until my heart stopped racing. She called around that afternoon and found a therapist named Olive, who specialized in medical trauma, and got me an appointment for that week. A few days before my first therapy appointment, Alice came to me with this plan she'd been working on. She wanted to sneak back into Dad's house when he was at work and go through Grandma's phone because Grandma never locked it and always left it charging in the kitchen. Alice figured there would be texts about us, or about that night that we could use as evidence. I told her absolutely not, that it was way too dangerous, and probably illegal too. She got upset saying we needed more proof, but I explained that we had enough evidence already, and breaking into Dad's house would only make us look bad, and could get Mom in trouble. We agreed to trust the legal process, and let the adults handle getting evidence the right way. After my first session with Olive, where I mostly just told her what happened, I met with Hector and Cecilia at Mom's attorney's office. I played them the recording from the supervised visit, where Dad grabbed my wrist and accused Mom of coaching us. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but you could clearly hear Dad saying Mom had poisoned us against him and that she'd been planning this for years. Cecilia took notes while listening, and Hector asked me why I'd thought to record it. I explained that Mom had always told us to document everything with Dad's family because they would lie about what happened, and this seemed like something important to have proof of. They said the recording showed a clear pattern of Dad trying to manipulate us and blame Mom for everything, instead of taking responsibility for what happened at Thanksgiving. The next day, Sophie called to say she wanted to work with Alice on writing down what happened at Thanksgiving. Mom drove us to the school counselor's office, where Sophie had set up a quiet room with colored pens and paper. Alice sat at the small table and started writing slowly, her tongue poking out the way it does when she's concentrating hard. Sophie sat next to her, not rushing, just being there while Alice wrote about how scared she was when I fell on the floor. She wrote about Grandma grabbing her ankle and how she bit her to get free. She wrote about calling 911 and Dad yelling at her to hang up. When Alice's hand got tired, Sophie helped her take breaks, and they practiced reading parts out loud. Alice's voice shook at first, but got stronger each time she read about saving my life. Sophie recorded Alice reading the whole thing on her phone so Alice could practice at home too. Meanwhile, Cecilia had me come to her office 3 times that week to go over every single detail of Thanksgiving. She had this big timeline on a whiteboard, and we went through it minute by minute. I kept getting mad when I talked about Uncle Robert laughing at me, or Grandma screaming about her rug while I was dying. Cecilia would stop me and make me breathe and count to 10. She explained that getting emotional during the deposition would make Dad's lawyer try to confuse me. We practiced with her assistant pretending to be Dad's lawyer, asking me trick questions and trying to make me lose my temper. By the 3rd session, I could tell the whole story without my voice shaking or my fists clenching. Alice was playing a game on her phone one afternoon when she noticed something weird in her settings. There was an app she didn't download called Family Tracker that showed her location all the time. She showed Mom, who immediately called Cecilia's office. Their IT guy came to the house that same day and found the app was installed with Dad's Apple ID. He took screenshots of everything, showing when it was installed and how it tracked Alice 24/7. The IT guy also found Dad could see her text messages through the app. He wiped her phone completely clean and set her up with a new Apple ID that Dad couldn't access. Alice was quiet for hours after finding out Dad had been watching her like that. 2 weeks later, we had our first hearing at the courthouse. The room was smaller than I expected, with wood panels on the walls and a judge who looked tired. Dad sat on one side with his lawyer, and we sat on the other with Cecilia. Hector stood in the middle since he was there for me and Alice. The judge read through all the reports from Donna, the hospital, and Hector. Dad's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, but the judge cut him off. She ordered supervised visitation only, twice a month for 2 hours each. Dad had to take parenting classes and complete them before he could ask for any changes. She also said Grandma couldn't be at any visits and couldn't pick us up from the school. Dad's face turned red, but his lawyer grabbed his arm before he could say anything. It wasn't full custody for Mom, but at least we were safe. That night, Bethany texted Alice a bunch of screenshots from the family group chat. They were calling us liars and brats. Aunt Linda wrote that we were just like our mother, manipulative and dramatic. Uncle Robert said we needed discipline, not coddling. Grandma wrote the longest message about how we'd destroyed the family and turned our backs on blood. The worst part was Dad liked every single message. Alice cried reading them, and I wanted to throw my phone at the wall. Mom said to save everything and forward it to Cecilia. A few days later, Cecilia called with news that made my stomach drop. She'd been going through Dad's insurance records and found something from 3 months before Thanksgiving. Dad had called the nurse line about my severe stomach pain, and they told him to take me to urgent care immediately. He never took me. The insurance showed he declined the recommended visit. Cecilia said this proved a pattern, that Thanksgiving wasn't the first time he ignored my medical needs. She was adding it to our evidence file. Alice had to go with Mom to pick something up at Grandma's church for the custody case. While Mom talked to the secretary, Alice waited in the hall. She heard 2 older ladies whispering about our family. One said she always thought Grandma was too harsh on those kids. The other said she saw what happened at Easter when I threw up and how mean everyone was to an 8-year-old. A man walking by added that he'd heard about the Thanksgiving incident from his daughter who worked at the hospital. Recording that supervised visit was pretty clever. I wonder if Mason knew something would happen, or just had good instincts about documenting everything with this family. The tracking app on Alice's phone raises questions about how long Dad had been monitoring her movements and messages before all this happened. Alice realized not everyone believed Grandma's version of perfect family. Some people were starting to see the truth. My sessions with Olive were hard at first. Every time I tried to talk about lying on Grandma's floor, my chest would get tight, and I'd feel like I couldn't breathe. Olive taught me to press my feet flat on the floor and count 5 things I could see, 4 I could hear, 3 I could touch, 2 I could smell, and 1 I could taste. It helped pull me back to her office instead of being stuck in that dining room. We practiced telling the story in small pieces, stopping whenever I needed to ground myself. After a few sessions, I could get through the whole thing without panicking. At Mom's apartment, Alice and I shared a room which actually made her feel better. She'd wake up 2 or 3 times every night and lean over to watch my chest rise and fall. Sometimes she'd whisper my name to make sure I'd respond. Mom got her a nightlight that projected stars on the ceiling, and we started a bedtime routine where we'd read together. Her nightmares were getting less frequent and less intense. She still had them, but now she knew she could wake me or Mom up, and we'd sit with her until she felt safe again. Then Dad's lawyer filed a thick stack of papers claiming Mom was turning us against him. He included old photos from when I was 5, and Alice was 2, all of us smiling at the zoo and the beach. He had pictures from every birthday and holiday before the divorce, trying to show we were happy in his care. The motion said Mom coached us to lie about Thanksgiving and was alienating us from our father. Cecilia laughed when she read it and said, "Judges see this all the time when parents can't accept responsibility." She said the medical evidence was too strong and no judge would believe we faked a burst appendix. 2 weeks later, Hector showed up at my school with a clipboard and a serious look on his face. He spent 3 hours talking to my math teacher, my English teacher, and the school nurse, who'd seen me doubled over with stomach pain twice that semester when Dad forgot to refill my acid reflux meds. Each teacher signed papers and handed over attendance records showing how many days I'd missed since the custody change. Sophie met with him in her office for another hour, showing him the notes she'd been keeping about Alice's anxiety attacks and how she'd started pulling out her eyelashes when stressed. The principal even pulled security footage from the day after Thanksgiving when Dad dropped us off and I could barely walk from the car to the building. Hector wrote everything down in this thick folder that kept getting bigger with every interview. The next morning, a detective named Rowan came to Mom's apartment with a digital recorder and asked me to tell him everything that happened at Thanksgiving. He had me go through it minute by minute, while Mom sat next to me squeezing my hand whenever my voice started shaking. He asked specific questions about who said what and when, how long I was on the floor, who physically stopped Alice from calling for help. When I told him about Grandma grabbing Alice's ankle, he made a note and underlined it twice. He said the hospital had filed their mandatory report and he needed my statement for the investigation. He explained that while criminal charges were unlikely because proving intent would be hard, the documentation would help with the custody case. 3 days later, Alice came home from the school with an envelope that had her name written in Grandma's perfect cursive. Mom wanted to open it first, but Alice said she could handle it. Inside was a 2-page letter about how disappointed Grandma was in Alice for biting her and calling 911 against the family's wishes. It said, good girls don't betray their grandmothers, and that Alice had shown her true colors, just like her mother. The last paragraph said Alice would need to apologize properly if she ever wanted to be welcome in their home again. Alice read it once, folded it back up, and asked Mom to give it to Hector for the custody file. She didn't cry or get upset, just went to do her homework, like nothing happened. Our first supervised visit with Dad was scheduled for the following Tuesday at this gray building downtown with security cameras everywhere. The supervisor was this older lady named Janet, who explained the rules while we sat in a room that looked like a sad daycare center with old toys and peeling paint. Dad showed up 5 minutes late wearing his work clothes and looking tired. We played Uno for 20 minutes before I finally asked him straight out why he didn't believe me when I said I was in pain at Thanksgiving. He stopped mid-shuffle and stared at his cards for a long time. Janet leaned forward with her pen ready. Dad finally said he thought I was being dramatic like my mother always was, that she'd taught me to manipulate situations for attention. Janet wrote down every word while Dad kept talking about how Mom had poisoned us against his family and made us soft. The next visit was worse because Dad started treating Alice and me completely differently. He brought Alice her favorite candy and kept calling her sweetheart while barely looking at me. When I dropped a card, he muttered something about me being clumsy and weak. Alice started keeping a little notebook in her backpack where she wrote down everything he said during visits. Things like calling me oversensitive when I mentioned still having pain from the surgery, or saying I needed to toughen up and stop acting like a baby. She showed me the list after our 3rd visit, and it was already 2 pages long. Meanwhile, Cecilia had been working with my surgeon to get the complete medical records from my surgery. The final report came in on a Thursday, and Mom read it to us at the kitchen table. It showed a timeline proving my appendix had likely started failing around noon on Thanksgiving, hours before I first told Dad about the pain. The surgeon documented that the delay in treatment caused the rupture and the spreading infection that nearly killed me. She used words like preventable and negligent delay that Cecilia said would destroy Dad's case. The report included photos from the surgery showing how bad the infection was and how much damage had been done by waiting. That weekend, Alice and I were leaving the visitation center when Aunt Linda suddenly appeared in the parking lot. She started walking toward Alice with her arms out like she was going to hug her, but the security guard immediately stepped between them. Aunt Linda started yelling about just wanting to talk to her niece, but the guard called for backup and told her she was violating the visitation rules. 2 more staff members came out and formed a wall between us and Aunt Linda, while Mom rushed us to the car. Another violation report got added to our file. The following Monday, the judge ordered Dad to undergo a psychological evaluation to determine his fitness as a parent. Cecilia explained that he had no choice but to comply, or he'd lose all custody rights immediately. The evaluation would include personality tests, interviews about his parenting choices, and a review of the Thanksgiving incident. Dad's lawyer tried to argue it was unnecessary, but the judge said the medical evidence and multiple violation reports made it mandatory. A week later, Donna came over with good news about the safety plan extension. She said CPS was keeping us with Mom until the final custody hearing in 2 months, and that she was officially recommending permanent custody modification based on medical neglect. She had a thick file of evidence including the surgeon's report, the detective's notes, teacher interviews, and all the violation reports from Dad's family. She said she'd been doing this job for 15 years and had rarely seen such clear documentation of neglect. Hector called that night to schedule practice sessions for our testimony and said we needed to be ready to stay calm and stick to facts without seeming vengeful or coached. Sophie met with Alice 3 times that week in the school counselor's office, and I watched through the window as they moved chairs around to make it look like a courtroom. Alice stood at a pretend witness stand they made from a desk, while Sophie played different roles. First, the nice lawyer asking easy questions, then switching to play Dad's attorney trying to confuse her. Sophie showed Alice a red card she could hold up if she needed a break, teaching her it was okay to pause instead of getting overwhelmed. Each time they practiced, Alice got better at staying calm when Sophie asked tricky questions about whether Mom told her what to say. By the 3rd session, Alice was answering clearly without looking at Sophie for help, keeping her hands steady on the desk even when Sophie raised her voice like Dad's lawyer might. 2 weeks before the trial, I woke up with my surgical site feeling hot and swollen, and when Mom checked it, she saw red streaks spreading from the incision. She drove me to urgent care immediately, while Alice sat in the back seat crying that I was going to die again. The doctor said it was just a minor infection, but needed antibiotics right away, and he cleaned the wound while I gripped the exam table. Mom took photos of the infected site for our records, and the urgent care doctor wrote a note saying this was common after emergency surgery with complications. Alice held my hand the whole time, checking my face every few seconds to make sure I was still okay. The antibiotics worked fast, but the whole thing scared everyone, especially when Cecilia said we needed to document it as ongoing medical issues from the original neglect. 3 days later, Mom took Alice for her regular pediatrician appointment that she'd been getting every 6 months since the divorce. The doctor pulled up Alice's complete medical history on his computer, showing she'd never missed a vaccine or checkup while in Mom's care. Talk about building a case brick by brick. Between Hector's growing folder of evidence and Alice's secret notebook tracking Dad's comments, these kids are basically running their own legal department with better documentation than most law firms. He printed out 5 years of records showing Alice's growth charts, immunization records, and notes from every visit where Mom asked questions about Alice's development. The pediatrician wrote a letter stating Alice received consistent, appropriate medical care under Mom's custody, unlike what happened at Dad's house. Cecilia added these records to our evidence binder, which was now 3 inches thick. The morning of the trial, we all got dressed in the clothes Cecilia picked out for us. Me in khakis and a button-down shirt that didn't press on my healing scar. Alice in a blue dress with her hair in braids. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and uncomfortable benches. Dad's attorney started his opening statement by waving his arms around, saying Mom had poisoned us against our father and coached us to lie about Thanksgiving. He called the whole thing a manipulation to get more child support, saying Mom was bitter about the divorce. Cecilia sat perfectly still taking notes while he talked, not reacting to any of his accusations. When it was her turn, she stood up with our evidence binder and calmly laid out the medical timeline, starting with my symptoms at noon and ending with emergency surgery for a burst appendix. She showed the judge photos from my surgery, the surgeon's report about how close I came to dying, and the infection I just had as proof of ongoing complications. Dad's attorney kept objecting, but the judge told him to sit down and let her finish. Alice went to the witness stand first, and I could see her hands shaking as she put them on the Bible. She told about hearing me ask for help over and over, watching me turn white and fall down, seeing Grandma grab her ankle to stop her from calling 911. When Dad's attorney tried to ask if Mom told her to say these things, Alice held up her red card and said she needed a break. After 2 minutes, she came back and answered clearly that Mom only told her to tell the truth. Dad's attorney asked why she bit Grandma, and Alice said because Grandma was hurting her and stopping her from saving me. The judge wrote notes the whole time Alice talked. When it was my turn, I brought my evidence folder to the stand, my hands steady even though my stomach was churning. I played the audio recording from the supervised visit where Dad tried to get me to blame Mom, and you could hear the judge typing on her computer as it played. I showed her my journal entries from right after surgery when everything was fresh, reading the parts about thinking I was dying while Dad called me dramatic. I looked straight at Dad when I described lying on Grandma's floor believing I might not make it, watching him choose his mother's approval over my life. Dad looked away first. The surgeon's letter got entered as evidence, with the parts about preventable complications and negligent delay highlighted in yellow. When I finished, Dad's attorney barely asked me anything, just confirmed the dates and times. During the lunch break, we sat in the courthouse hallway eating sandwiches Mom packed when Dad walked up to Alice. He started saying he was sorry, that he never meant for things to go so far, but Alice stood up and told him she wasn't ready to hear it. Sophie stepped between them and walked Alice to the bathroom, while Dad just stood there with his mouth open. I was so proud of her for not letting him make her feel bad about protecting herself. When closing arguments started, Hector stood up with a thick folder of recommendations. He told the judge that based on medical evidence, witness testimony, and multiple violations of court orders, he was recommending primary physical custody to Mom with supervised visitation for Dad twice a month. He said Dad needed to complete therapy and parenting classes before any unsupervised visits, and that Grandma should have no contact with us during visits. He looked at the judge and said, our safety had to come first, that we'd already almost lost one child to neglect. Dad's attorney argued for joint custody, but even he seemed to know it was hopeless. While we waited for the judge to make her decision, Mom took us for ice cream at the place near the courthouse. We sat outside eating our cones, and Mom asked Alice about her friend's birthday party next week, trying to talk about normal things. Alice actually laughed when Mom got chocolate on her nose, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in weeks. We went back to the courthouse, and the judge called us into her chambers instead of the courtroom. She said she'd reviewed all the evidence and testimony, and her decision was clear. Mom got primary physical custody. Dad got supervised visitation twice a month for 6 months. Then they'd review. Dad had to complete therapy and parenting classes, pay for our therapy, and Grandma was banned from the school grounds and any visits. We all started crying with relief, even Mom, who'd been trying to stay strong. The judge signed the order right there, making it official immediately. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, and Mom drove us straight to get milkshakes to celebrate. 2 weeks later, Alice was back at her regular school schedule, and kids kept asking her weird questions about why she wasn't living with Dad anymore. Sophie met with her every Tuesday during lunch and taught her to just say it was grown-up stuff and change the subject. Alice told me she actually missed Grandma's Christmas cookies and the big tree at Dad's house, but she knew we couldn't go back there. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Bethany saying she was sorry for not helping me on Thanksgiving when she could see I was really sick. She wrote that she wanted to maybe hang out sometime if I was okay with it, but she understood if I never wanted to see any of them again. I texted back that maybe someday we could talk, but right now Alice and I needed space to figure things out without pressure from Dad's side of the family. The supervised visitation center was this boring building with old toys and a two-way mirror where someone watched everything. Dad showed up to our first visit carrying a board game and actually asked us what we wanted to play instead of just telling us. He followed all the supervisor's rules about not discussing the court case, or Mom, and we played 3 rounds of sorry without any drama. During my Thursday therapy sessions, Olive kept asking me what I wanted now that we were safe with Mom. I told her I still felt mad at Dad for almost letting me die, but she helped me see that protecting ourselves was more important than getting revenge. She had me write down 3 good things that happened each week, even when I didn't want to think about anything positive. Mom set up her laptop one Saturday, so Alice and I could video chat with her parents who lived across the country. They asked how school was going and talked about their garden instead of pushing us to explain everything that happened with Dad. Grandpa showed us his new tomato plants, and Grandma, Mom's mom, not Fiona, sent us a care package with homemade cookies that actually tasted good. One morning I was getting ready for school and caught myself staring at the scar on my stomach in the bathroom mirror. It wasn't just ugly proof of what happened anymore, but evidence that I fought to stay alive, even when nobody would listen to me. I grabbed my journal and wrote about how Alice and I went to the park yesterday, and she laughed on the swings for the first time in months. Sophie gave Alice a special notebook to write down what she wanted to tell the judge at our 6-month review hearing coming up. Alice spent hours working on it, crossing things out and starting over, focusing on how much better she felt now that she knew we were safe. She practiced reading it to me and Mom, saying things like how she could sleep through the night now and wasn't scared of getting in trouble for calling 911. 6 months after that terrible Thanksgiving, I woke up in my bed at Mom's apartment and realized we had a routine that actually worked. Alice caught the bus to the school without crying. I was back on the basketball team, and we saw Dad twice a month at the center where he was actually trying. He'd started his therapy and parenting classes, and even admitted once that he should have listened to me that night. The anger wasn't gone, and probably never would be completely, but it didn't control everything I did anymore. Alice and I had our own inside jokes now, and she'd stop checking on me every night to make sure I was still breathing. We weren't trying to destroy anyone anymore, just trying to be regular kids who happened to have a really messed up story about a Thanksgiving dinner. The trauma counselor said healing wasn't a straight line, and some days were harder than others, but we were doing it. Mom had primary custody. Dad was getting the help he needed, and Alice and I knew we'd always have each other no matter what happened at the next court review or anywhere else. Makes you wonder, right? All those years of medical records might have been the one thing that left Dad's lawyer completely quiet during cross-examination. Like the video, it helps more than you think.